All right, we're back, and Greg is just about to tell us more about essentially, it's a cold frame, isn't it?
Well, I would call it various forms of portable microclimates. So when I first established my garden, I read about cold frames, which are in one place. They're static, right? You build the cold frame and that's where your cold frame is. And then
Mhm.
whatever you're growing in your cold frame, you either got to pull it out and move it somewhere else or let it grow there. And if I I evolved from the cold frame, which I didn't like because you can't really do crop rotations. I mean, remember with vegetables, there's a pretty substantial argument for the practice of rotating crops. If you plant the
Mhm.
same thing in the same place year after year after year, you run the risk of depleting that soil in some way in terms of nutrients, but also inviting in
Mhm.
very crop-specific pests to that place that lay their eggs there that fall, and then you can get into problems. So I thought, instead of doing that, why don't I just have little, either it could just be like an old window you lay on the ground. It could
Mhm.
be a dome that's,
Oh, just
some of,
directly on the ground.
yeah. So some of my domes are, let's say, 4 by 8 and a foot high at the peak.
Mhm.
Some of them are just glass windows that I just stick on the ground. Um, let's say I wanted to plant some spinach in a section of my garden. You
Mhm.
put a window down a week before you want to plant the spinach, let that warm the soil, right? And then you plant the seeds. And as soon as the seedlings are touching the glass, you take it off. And for a
Oh. Mhm.
spinach is so tough, it can freeze and thaw out overnight and keep going, right?
Mhm.
So it really depends on the plant. But I would say I use a variety
Do you
of
use the black plastic or because I've
The
seen
no,
that
window.
done? No? Why? Can't
no,
you can't
because
see it?
you need the light to get through to warm up the soil, right? So you're trying to get a seed to germinate.
Yeah.
If your the black plastic attracts heat to itself, and to some extent, the black plastic will, through conduction, will conduct heat to the soil. There might be a degree of convection heat going to
Yeah.
the soil. When you have clear plastic, the sun is shining on your soil, which is dark.
Yeah.
Remember, your
Mhm.
soil is dark,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah, that makes
Sun's
sense.
shining on your soil. So all of that incredible energy from the sun, when you think about think about the difference between a light bulb and the sun, all that radiation is bombarding your
Yeah.
soil and heating it up. So I've played around, and I found that you can get a lot more heat in your soil by just using clear plastic and letting the sun shine on the soil. But also when you're trying to get seeds to germinate, once they poke up through the soil, you want them to see sun. You don't want them
Mhm.
to be in
Yeah.
darkness. They won't, right? So another advantage of doing it that way is that your seedlings, you don't have the problem with a transplant where you have to harden it off. They're getting full full sun from day one. I think I might even
Mhm.
have a video with that name, full sun from day one, so that you don't have to harden them off. They're getting full sun right
Mhm.
from the moment they emerge from the soil. They get all that advantage, all of that energy, right? Their roots are going into the real ground. Another advantage is, you think about a transplant, you're growing it indoors, 20 Celsius room
Delicate.
temperature.
Yeah.
Mhm.
They've been in 20 Celsius 24 hours a day, no wind, no extremes, no up, no down, no this, no that, right? Just no cold, rain, no nothing, right? As opposed to having something, even when you've got it under the protected environment of a dome, where I live, it's still getting below zero at night here.
Mhm.
So what works better, glass or plastic?
Glass is better, but it's harder to come by. It costs
Yeah.
more. It's heavier, right?
Mhm.
I got some of these like wooden boxes. So for things that I can move, so some plants hate being transplanted, like lettuce and spinach is a good example. Lettuce doesn't mind being transplanted at all. You can pluck a lettuce plant up and move it somewhere. You pluck up a spinach plant and move it somewhere. I'll lay you 9 to 1 odds that that spinach plant is going to bolt. Spinach
Mhm.
hates being moved, right?
Hmm.
Um, so depending on what you're growing, if it's like right over my garden right now, I'll plant something like broccoli, and I'll plant it just under a 3 by 3 box with plastic on top. When I initially made those boxes, I had old windows that I get out of someone's trash on the top. Well, they weigh like 50 pounds, right? Because glass, right?
Mhm.
They're heavy. So I found myself taking the windows off and just putting 6 mil poly over them, and you can get a big roll of it at a hardware store because it just weighs less, right?
Yeah.
I'm sure, I'm not even sure, I'm certain the glass is more insulative. You know, it's clearer. I think the glass does a better job, but it's more convenient. It's cheaper, easier,
Yeah.
more convenient, easier on the back, all that sort of stuff to use plastic, you know, like wood, you know,
Mhm.
wood. The thing has to be heavy enough that it doesn't blow away because it's insanely windy here too. It can get up to like, I don't know, 100 kilometers an hour. So we get hurricane force winds here sometimes. But
So
yeah,
you
use
use all
glass
this
or
to,
use whatever you can get, and you know, use if you see a window in someone's trash and you want to save a few bucks, use that. But I wouldn't go out and buy it.
so
Absolutely not.
so you preheat the soil and you start your seeds in preheated soil.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, you know, if that's in the event that the soil is frozen, right? Like a few weeks ago in March, I was planting some spinach.
Mhm,
Well, I had to put domes over the soil because it was ice.
mhm.
You know, here we don't. It's a weird climate here. We don't have like a layer of snow that just accumulates over the course of the winter and then reduces over the course of the spring. Uh, we will have a week here in Nova Scotia in the dead of winter, like let's say end of January, where it warms up to
Mhm.
+8 and rains for 3 days and all the snow disappears.
Yeah.
And then it'll drop down to -15, -20 Celsius, and the soil just turns to ice, and then it'll snow on top of that icy soil, and so on and so forth. So oftentimes when I'm planting my spinach, I'm putting a thing over to make the soil thawed. Maybe the first 3 inches of the soil thaws. I'm planting spinach, but it's ice from, you know, if you go down 3 inches, it's ice all the way down for another
Really?
foot.
Well,
And it just,
why would you plant your spinach in that then though?
because the soil's got, because I'm putting it in a microclimate, the soil is going to continue to thaw. It's going to continue to
Mhm.
thaw all the way down. And the spinach doesn't mind. It's going to take a week.
Okay.
It's going to take a week to germinate anyway. So during that week after I've put the seed in, it's going to get another inch and another inch, and right. So that the thawing of the soil, and again, I'm doing this in March.
Mhm.
So, you know, things generally speaking start, unless it's the worst year ever, tend to start thawing out here in April. Right. So
Mhm.
I know that's going to happen. So I'm just getting a bit ahead of schedule. Right.
Okay.
So it's just to get the spinach, and I don't plant all my spinach at that point in time. It's just to get something started early. Right. And it can work for anything you want to plant. You can plant it a little bit earlier under a microclimate. I think the
Mhm.
rule of thumb is that you can break whatever your rules are for where you live. You can break those rules by about a month. Right. You can
Oh,
Yeah.
move things about a month ahead. Or
So
to
what do
put
you
it
do with
another way,
something like tomatoes? Do you plant your tomatoes in pots?
no, I plant them directly in the ground outdoors.
So how do you
Um,
keep them warm? With the same sort of
because
method?
they need a certain amount of heat to
They need
just to
the
germinate.
soil to be quite
yeah,
warm, right?
I do
See,
the same damn thing.
we've got a guy out here called Mr. Tomato, who, by the way, he discovered seaweed and he made a whole business out of it, made himself a fortune selling seaweed to the garden centers and all over North America. He called it Sea Magic.
You guys were already using it, right?
I'm using his supplier in Nova Scotia now. We give seaweed away to people, but who subscribe to the magazine. So there you are,
Right.
folks. If you want to buy the magazine, maybe you can get some free seaweed from
There
us.
you go.
A little free ad in there.
Maybe I should
But
buy one.
he had something. He had another product called Cozy Coats, and it was a plastic cloche, right? Well, it was sort of a
Mhm.
round thing that when you filled with water to keep to create a
Oh,
microclimate for early starting. Have you tried that?
I've seen them though. I imagine they work really well.
Yeah,
Mhm.
yeah.
Yeah, no one's offered to give me some for free, so I
No.
haven't tried it.
Well, Brian sold the business, so I'm not sure he has it anymore.
But yeah,
Okay.
but I could see that, you know, it would be insulative, you
Yeah,
know, so I could see it totally working. I mean, it wouldn't last forever. You would run the risk where I live, even till like right up until the beginning of June, and sometimes even in the first week of June. I have a goldfish pond in my backyard. I get ice on the pond at night, right up
wow.
until first week of June, despite being in
Mhm.
zone 6A, right? Just because it's just so strange here, right? It really depends on if the weather's coming out of the north and off the landmass, right? It'll be
Mhm.
unseasonably cold. And if the weather's coming off the ocean, it'll be generally, when you're still in the cold part of the year, it'll be unseasonably warm. In
Yeah.
in the summer, it's the opposite. If the weather's coming off the ocean, it cools right down, right? And if the weather's coming off the land, it gets like crazy warm. So
But
it's a
zone
weird.
6A, wow, I didn't know it was that.
It just doesn't get that cold.
Yeah,
Yeah, that's why.
that's like those great big trees.
The Canadian zone has to do with it has to do with a lot of things, but the fact that it doesn't what's the coldest it'll get there usually?
Oh, like minus in the low 20s, negative
Minus
20.
20?
Yeah,
Oh,
if you
that's
get
not that
minus
bad.
20, maybe minus 25 or something like
Yeah.
that. But that would be like really the coldest. This winter was exceptionally mild.
Mhm.
But I mean, it's important to note that your zone has nothing to do about your growing conditions.
No.
Your growing conditions are about, like, my mother lived in Alberta, Edmonton, Alberta, zone
Mhm.
3A, right? And her tomatoes would always be ripe before mine. And I'm in zone 6A.
They need heat.
And it's because they get sun every damn day, all day.
Yeah.
Almost 24 hours a day of sun, right? So they just get so much good sun, right?
That's the
Where
advantage of being here in Manitoba too.
That's the advantage. And the disadvantage slightly though is that the tomatoes will get sun scald.
Well, they
really?
will if it's
Yeah.
too direct.
Yeah.
They like a little bit of shade. So there's a little good with and a little bad with every condition in Canada
Yes.
that you can come across.
Except in
Absolutely.
Vancouver.
Or Victoria.
Yeah,
And
they seem
Vancouver
to have
Island.
it all.